The silent witness. The city was never quiet, but to Evelyn it always felt as though the world was muffled around her. People walked by in a blur, their lives moving too fast, while hers seemed to stagnate, frozen in the same cycle of survival. She knew the streets well, knew when to avoid the danger zones and when to keep her head low. It was how she had survived all these years, keeping her eyes on the ground, avoiding trouble. That day, however, was different. Evelyn had been on her way to the market when she noticed the group of young men hanging out by the corner. They weren't the usual kind of troublemakers. These were more dangerous. Their eyes gleamed with menace, and their laughter echoed like a prelude to something worse. Evelyn knew that crossing them would be a mistake, but there was no way around it. She had to make it to the market to buy food for her mother. The moment she passed them, she felt the air shift. A hand gripped her arm, rough, pulling her back. She spun around to face the man who had stopped her, but the words stuck in her throat. He grinned, eyes gleaming with disdain. "Where do you think you're going, girl?" he sneered, tightening his grip. Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel her breath quicken, but she didn't dare fight back. There were too many of them, they were too strong. Before she could speak, a voice called out from behind them. "Hey, let her go." Evelyn blinked, momentarily distracted. The voice was foreign, deep, unfamiliar, but it was insistent. She turned her head, eyes widening slightly as a tall man stepped forward. He had the air of someone who didn't belong here. His face was fresh, still soft with the untainted expression of someone who had recently moved to the city. "Stay out of this," one of the men growled, moving to face the newcomer. The man didn't flinch. Instead, he squared his shoulders. "You've got no right to treat her this way." Evelyn's heart raced. She'd never seen anyone stand up to them before. They were untouchable here in this part of the city. Everyone else either feared them or pretended they didn't exist. One of the gang members laughed, stepping closer. "You think you can stop us?" The tall man, who Evelyn now saw was taller and broader than most in the city, didn't hesitate. He took a step forward, his voice low but commanding. "I don't think I know." But before he could even brace himself, one of the men struck him, hard across the jaw. The crowd watched, silent, like they always did when violence was being committed, but no one intervened. Not even when the man stumbled back, hand pressed to his bleeding lip. The gang members laughed as if the sight of a new face being humiliated was the highlight of their day. For a brief moment, Evelyn stood frozen. She had seen this before. The helplessness of being caught in a cycle where no one cared about right or wrong, where survival trumped everything else. But now she saw something else in the man, the spark of defiance, even in the face of violence. "Leave him alone," Evelyn whispered, more to herself than to the others. The words barely left her lips when one of the men turned toward her, a menacing grin on his face. "What's this? You want to protect him?" he mocked. For the first time in what felt like forever, Evelyn's eyes met the man. His pain was palpable, but so was his determination. "I'm not afraid of you," she said, her voice firmer now. The gang members paused, and in that silence, Evelyn realized something important. This man, this stranger, had shown her what it was like to stand tall, to fight back, even when the odds seemed impossible. And then, against all reason, something within her stirred. The fractured trust. Evelyn didn't know what to make of him. The man Nash, he'd called himself, had stepped into the chaos with a fierce determination, something she hadn't seen in anyone around here in years. And then, as quickly as the encounter had started, it was over. The gang members scattered, laughing and jeering, but Nash remained standing, his body slightly swaying from the hit he'd taken, the blood from his lip already drying. It didn't make sense. Why would anyone risk themselves like that for someone they didn't even know? But as he slowly turned to face her, his blue eyes meeting hers, something stirred in Evelyn's chest. She couldn't explain it. Gratitude? Pity? Or perhaps something more complicated, a fleeting sense of connection that felt as foreign as it was unwelcome. She had spent so long in this city, believing in nothing but the harshness of survival, that the idea of someone standing up for her, of someone willing to take the hit for her, felt like a lie. It didn't happen here. People didn't protect others, they protected themselves. "Are you okay?" Nash asked, his voice softer now, the urgency in his tone replaced by concern. Evelyn didn't know how to respond. She couldn't even look at him directly. The vulnerability of the moment, the unexpectedness of it all, was almost too much to bear. She had never been the kind of person to depend on others. Trust was a currency in short supply in this world, and she wasn't about to start wasting it now. "I'm fine," she muttered, her voice sharp and guarded. She turned away quickly, not waiting for him to say anything else. She didn't need his help. She didn't need anyone's help. But as she walked away, she could feel his eyes on her, a weight pressing against her back. He didn't understand the rules of this place. He didn't know how dangerous it was to stand out to make yourself a target. The next day, she thought she would be rid of him. She'd go back to the same routine, lay low, keep her head down. But when she walked into the small corner store on the edge of her neighborhood, there he was, standing by the shelves, his fingers brushing over cans of food. He noticed her immediately, his gaze softened. "Hey, you Evelyn, right?" She froze for a moment, her stomach turning. How did he know her name? She hadn't told him. She hadn't even introduced herself. Yeah," she replied, her voice stiff. "What do you want?" Nash shifted awkwardly. He had clearly been preparing to say something, but the words were suddenly harder to find. He stepped toward her. "Look, I didn't mean to get you involved yesterday. I couldn't stand by and watch them do that." Evelyn frowned, glancing at the door as if hoping it might offer an escape route. She didn't want to deal with this, didn't want to deal with him. People like him didn't belong here, didn't understand what it meant to be a part of this world, to survive in a place where kindness was a liability. "I don't need your help," she said, her voice harder this time, laced with the bitterness of someone who had learned the hard way that kindness was rarely genuine. "You don't know what you're getting yourself into. Go back to where you came from. This isn't your fight." Nash stood still, his expression unreadable. "Maybe it's not my fight, but that doesn't mean I can't stand up for what's right." Evelyn's eyes narrowed, the skepticism evident in her gaze. "What's right? Do you even know what that is around here?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, his eyes softened with something akin to regret. "Maybe not yet, but I want to understand. I'm not going to just walk away." The words hit Evelyn harder than she expected. Why couldn't he just go away? Why couldn't he just leave her to the life she had known, to the silence and the shadows that kept her safe? She didn't want to need him, didn't want to need anyone, but his stubbornness, his refusal to back down, gnawed at her. "I don't need saving," she said more quietly now, almost to herself. "Not from you, not from anyone." For a long moment they just stood there, an awkward tension hanging between them. Nash seemed to take a deep breath, as if trying to find the right words. "I don't think it's about saving you, Evelyn," he said softly. "I think it's about standing with you, whether you want it or not." She looked up at him, studying his face. It was strange to hear someone say something like that, someone who didn't owe her anything, someone who wasn't part of her world. But for some reason, it made the knot in her chest tighten. "Don't get involved," she warned again, but this time there was no venom in her words. Instead, it was a plea, one that she couldn't bring herself to say out loud. She didn't want to be responsible for someone else's pain, especially not someone who seemed to have no idea what he was getting himself into. Nash hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I'll leave you alone for now, but I'm not going to walk away from what happened. I don't want to see anyone else go through that." And with that, he turned and walked out of the store, leaving Evelyn standing there, her thoughts swirling in a cloud of confusion. The following days passed in a blur of routine. Evelyn tried to forget about Nash, tried to return to her solitary existence, but his words lingered in the back of her mind. She had seen plenty of people come and go in this neighborhood, outsiders who tried to help and then realized it was futile. Nash wouldn't be any different. She could push him away just like the others, keep him at arm's length, protect herself. But still, when she turned the corner and saw him again, standing near the same street corner where she'd been harassed, she couldn't ignore the pang in her chest. He wasn't backing down. Evelyn knew she had made her choice. It wasn't about him saving her. It was about whether she could allow herself to be part of something bigger than her own survival. And that scared her more than anything else. A daring choice. The days after their second encounter seemed to stretch on forever, each one blending into the next in a haze of uncertainty. Evelyn continued to go about her daily life, walking the same familiar streets, keeping her head down and trying to stay out of trouble. The weight of Nash's words lingered in her mind like a constant hum, but she refused to acknowledge it. She couldn't afford to. She couldn't afford to let anyone into her world, especially someone like him. Someone who didn't understand what it meant to live here, in the shadow of this city's deepest wounds. But Nash Calloway was hard to ignore. He continued to appear in unexpected places, always lingering at the edges of her daily life. Sometimes it was a brief encounter at the local convenience store, where he would offer a shy greeting or a quick wave as he walked by her apartment building. At first, Evelyn ignored him, brushing off his attempts to make conversation. But she couldn't help but notice the way he always seemed to be watching out for her, even from a distance, as though he truly cared whether she made it through the day unscathed. And that, more than anything else, unsettled her. It was a warm afternoon when it happened. Evelyn was returning from a quick trip to the market, the plastic bags heavy in her hands, when she saw the group of men again. They were standing in front of a rundown building near the edge of her street, their faces hard with malice. She froze, heart pounding in her chest. The last time she'd crossed their path, it hadn't ended well. The same men who had harassed her were now staring her down, their eyes full of unspoken threats. "Look who it is," one of them sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. "The quiet little mouse thought you could slip by again." Evelyn's grip on the bags tightened. She knew what was coming. It wasn't just words anymore. The street corner had become their battleground, and she was the target. She didn't have the energy to run. She had nowhere to run to. But then she heard a voice, cutting through the tension. "Leave her alone," Nash said, his tone calm but firm. Evelyn turned her head in disbelief. Nash had come out of nowhere, stepping into the line of fire without a second thought. She could see the way the gang members sized him up, a mixture of amusement and threat flickering in their eyes. "What's this, a hero?" One of the men laughed. "You think you can just walk in here and play the knight in shining armor?" Nash didn't back down. His posture was rigid, but his eyes betrayed the uncertainty he felt. "I'm not here to fight," he said, his voice steady. "I'm here to make sure you don't hurt her." Evelyn could see the men laughing now, circling him like vultures. It was foolish, and she knew it. He didn't belong here. He didn't understand the game they were playing, the brutal rules of survival. If he thought he could just waltz in and change things, he was gravely mistaken. "Listen to me," she said, her voice sharp as she stepped forward. "You don't know them. They won't stop until they get what they want." Nash turned to her, his expression softening. "I know that, but I can't just stand by and watch you get hurt. Not again." The way he said it, so simple, so earnest, struck Evelyn like a slap to the face. He was willing to risk his life for someone he barely knew. Was it naive, or was it something more? "Don't," she pleaded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't do this. They'll hurt you." Nash didn't respond. Instead, he took a step closer to the gang, his body tense but resolute. "I'm not afraid of you." The tension in the air thickened, crackling with the promise of violence. Evelyn could feel her heart race, her instincts screaming at her to run, to get away, but she couldn't move. She didn't know if it was the shock of Nash's words or the fact that someone had finally stood up to these men, but something inside her made her stay. The leader of the gang, a tall man with tattoos running down his arms, stepped forward. His smirk was twisted with malice. "You think you can take us all on, pretty boy? You don't know where you are." Nash stood his ground. "I don't care where I am. I care about doing what's right." For a moment there was silence. Evelyn held her breath, waiting for the inevitable. But then, to her shock, the gang leader's expression shifted. It wasn't fear. It was something far worse, amusement. He let out a low chuckle before turning to his crew. "Fine," he said. "Let's see how far this little act of bravery gets you." And before Nash could react, the gang members lunged at him. Evelyn's instincts kicked in, and before she knew it, she was moving. She grabbed a nearby trash can lid, a makeshift weapon, and swung it toward the man closest to her. It was enough to send him stumbling backward, but it wasn't enough to stop the chaos that followed. Nash was already caught in the fray, struggling against the gang members. She could see the fear in his eyes, but there was something else there too, determination. Despite the odds stacked against him, he fought back with everything he had. And Evelyn realized in that moment that he wasn't just standing up for her. He was standing up for something bigger, something that had been missing from her life for a long time: hope. She fought her way through the crowd, dodging punches, trying to create enough of an opening for Nash to get free. It was a fight they couldn't win, not without help. The gang was too strong, too used to this kind of violence. But then, out of nowhere, a loud siren echoed through the street. Police cars skidded to a halt, their lights flashing in the chaos. The gang members hesitated for just a moment, giving Nash the chance to break free from their grasp. "Run," Evelyn shouted, grabbing his arm. They didn't have time to fight anymore. Nash didn't hesitate. Together, they sprinted down the street, dodging into an alleyway as the police swarmed the area. They didn't stop until they reached a small, quiet park on the other side of town, far from the violence and the chaos. Breathing heavily, they both collapsed onto a nearby bench, trying to catch their breath. "That was stupid," Evelyn muttered, but there was no real venom in her words. She was shaken, but there was something else too, a strange mix of relief and gratitude. Nash wiped the blood from his lip, the same spot where he'd been hit before. "Maybe," he said, "but I'd do it again." Evelyn looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. She had seen courage before, but never like this. And for the first time in what felt like years, she wasn't sure whether she should be afraid or grateful. The tenuous trust. The days after their escape from the gang felt like a breath of fresh air, even though Evelyn couldn't shake the constant feeling that something was about to break. They had managed to slip away that day, but Evelyn knew better than to believe the danger had passed. The city had its way of pulling people back into its depths, and nothing in her world was ever truly safe. Still, Nash's unwavering presence at her side had started to blur the line between annoyance and something else entirely. She had been skeptical at first, who wouldn't be? But now, in the quiet aftermath of the chaos, she found herself questioning everything she'd believed. Nash had stayed with her for the rest of the afternoon, walking with her through the park as they caught their breath, neither of them speaking much. But when they finally reached her apartment building, he stopped at the door and turned to face her, his eyes searching hers. "Evelyn," he said, his voice low, "I'm not going anywhere. You can keep pushing me away if you want, but I'm not going to walk away from this." She swallowed hard, trying to force down the lump in her throat. It wasn't easy to hear him say that. It wasn't easy to admit, even to herself, that she might need him more than she wanted to. "You don't understand," she said, her voice quieter now, tinged with a vulnerability she rarely showed. "This isn't just about me. This isn't just some petty fight in the street. These people, they don't stop. They never stop." Nash looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing her words before stepping closer. "I get that," he said, his voice steady. "I've seen what this place does to people. I know what it's like to feel like you're stuck in a system that doesn't care about you, but that doesn't mean you have to go through it alone." The words hit her like a ton of bricks, and for the first time, Evelyn felt a weight lifting off her chest. She had always kept everyone at arm's length, thinking that if she let them get too close, they'd just leave like everyone else. But Nash wasn't like the others. There was something in his eyes that told her he wasn't going to disappear when the going got tough. She couldn't say what it was, but she could feel it in her bones. "You should go," she said, but the words were half-hearted, and she knew it. She didn't want him to leave, but she couldn't bring herself to admit that, not yet. Nash nodded, understanding her hesitation. "I'll be around," he said quietly before turning to leave, but before he got too far, he paused and glanced back over his shoulder. "You can't keep running, Evelyn. You're not alone in this." With those words hanging in the air, he walked away, leaving her standing at the door, her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts, all tangled together in a knot of confusion and fear. For the next few days, Evelyn tried to return to her normal routine. She spent her mornings at the local market, picking up groceries and supplies, always with one eye on the street, aware of the potential danger that lurked around every corner. The gang wasn't going to forget what had happened that day. She knew that much. But as she walked, she couldn't shake the memory of Nash's words. "You're not alone in this." It was a thought she wasn't used to entertaining. She had never allowed herself to believe that anyone could care enough to stay. She had learned that lesson the hard way. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, and the price of letting someone in was too high. But Nash, there was something different about him. Something that made her want to believe, even if just for a moment, that there was more to this life than surviving from one day to the next. The next time she saw him, it was on the street again, outside a cafe near her apartment. He was sitting at one of the tables, watching the world pass by. It was a rare moment of calm, and for a second, Evelyn almost didn't approach him. But then, as if sensing her hesitation, Nash stood up and waved at her, his usual easy grin on his face. "You okay?" he asked, his voice warm but laced with concern. Evelyn nodded, but she couldn't meet his eyes. She wasn't sure what to say anymore. It wasn't that she didn't appreciate his presence, it was just too much. She was used to being alone, to keeping everyone at a distance. But Nash had a way of breaking through her walls, and it scared her. "I've been thinking," she said slowly, her voice quieter than usual. "I can't keep doing this game we're playing, pretending like nothing, going to change. It's not enough anymore." Nash looked at her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he took a step closer, closing the gap between them. "What are you saying?" Evelyn took a deep breath, her gaze falling to the ground. "I'm saying that I can't do it alone, but I don't know how to trust you either, not fully." Nash reached out, his hand brushing hers in a gesture that felt more intimate than she expected. His touch was gentle, and for a moment, everything else seemed to fade into the background. "You don't have to trust me all at once," he said softly. "I'm not asking you to give me everything, just a chance." It was hard to argue with that. She didn't know if she could ever fully trust him. But the sincerity in his eyes, the way he was looking at her, it made her question everything she had believed in up until this point. Could she let him in? Could she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, there was someone who would stand by her no matter what? Before she could respond, a voice interrupted them. "Evelyn." She turned her head sharply to see a familiar face, Detective Finn Larson, an old acquaintance who worked with the local police. He was standing at the edge of the cafe, his arms crossed, his gaze sharp and calculating. "I need to talk to you," Finn said, his tone serious. Evelyn's stomach dropped. She had always been wary of Finn, but she had never expected him to show up here, of all places. He wasn't someone who came to the cafes she frequented. "Not now," she said quickly, trying to avoid him. "I'm busy." But Finn wasn't one to back off easily. He took a step closer, his eyes narrowing as he looked between her and Nash. "You're involved with this guy now, huh?" he asked, his voice dripping with suspicion. Evelyn felt a knot tighten in her chest. She couldn't afford to be seen with Nash, not by someone like Finn. The detective had his own ways of getting information, and he wasn't shy about using them. "I don't have time for this," she said, turning toward Nash. "Let's go." But as they turned to leave, she could feel Finn's eyes boring into her back. She didn't know what he wanted, but she knew it wasn't good. And as much as she wanted to run, she knew that the truth was catching up with her. She couldn't keep hiding from it forever. A leap of faith. Evelyn's mind raced as she walked briskly away from Finn, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the weight of his gaze on her, the sharpness of his words still echoing in her ears. "You're involved with this guy now, huh?" He hadn't even tried to hide his judgment, and Evelyn knew what that meant. In this city, nothing went unnoticed. Detective Larson had a way of sniffing out secrets, and that was a dangerous thing. She couldn't afford to be tied to anyone, especially not Nash. As she walked, her pace quickened, the sharp click of her boots against the pavement echoing in the silence between her and Nash. She wasn't sure what she was doing anymore. She spent her whole life trying to stay in the shadows, keeping everyone at arm's length. And now, for the first time, someone was trying to break through those walls. Nash was following behind her, but he didn't say anything. He didn't press her for answers, even though she knew he had questions. There was a quiet understanding in the way he walked beside her, keeping pace without trying to force a conversation. She appreciated that in a way, but it also made everything feel more complicated. She couldn't run from him. She couldn't hide anymore. Finally, when they reached the alleyway near her apartment, she stopped and turned to face him, her voice shaking slightly as she spoke. "Finn's right, I can't be seen with you. I can't be involved in this. This life, these people. They'll drag you down with them. You don't know what you're getting into." Nash's gaze softened, but his resolve remained firm. "I know exactly what I'm getting into, Evelyn," he said quietly, his voice steady. "I'm getting into this because I don't want to see you go through it alone, and I'm not going to walk away no matter what." Evelyn swallowed hard, trying to push down the fear and doubt gnawing at her insides. She could feel her walls starting to crack, the ones she'd spent so long building, but she wasn't sure if she could let them fall completely. Could she really trust him? "I can't ask you to do this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't let you get dragged into my world." "You're not asking me," Nash replied, his voice firm. "I'm choosing to be here. I'm choosing to help you whether you like it or not." Evelyn didn't know how to respond to that. Part of her wanted to pull away, to shut him out again, but another part of her, something deep inside, was starting to realize that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to do this alone. "I don't know how to trust anyone," she admitted, her voice raw with honesty. "I've spent my whole life building walls to keep people out, and now you're here and I don't know what to do with that." Nash took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "You don't have to trust me all at once," he said softly. "Trust comes in small pieces, but I promise you I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going to force you to open up, but I'm here and I'll be here when you're ready." For the first time, Evelyn felt a wave of emotion surge through her chest. It wasn't just fear anymore, it was something else. Something she had been too afraid to feel for a long time. Hope. "I don't know what to do with that," she said, shaking her head slightly, her voice thick with the weight of her own uncertainty. "I don't know how to let someone in." Nash smiled gently, and for a moment the world around them seemed to pause. You don't have to know, just take it one step at a time. It felt like a leap of faith, but as she stood there in the dim light of the alley looking into Nash's steady eyes, Evelyn realized that she was ready to take that leap. For the first time in years, she wasn't running. And maybe, just maybe, that was the first step toward something more than just survival. The following days were tense, but there was a quiet undercurrent of something new. Evelyn found herself meeting Nash in the same places, at the same times, and every time she saw him, it felt a little easier to let her guard down. She didn't know how long it would last or where it would lead, but for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to feel something other than fear. Finn didn't give up easily. He showed up at her apartment a few more times, each visit more insistent than the last. But Evelyn refused to let him shake her. She didn't owe him anything, not anymore. She had made her choice, and she was standing by it. It wasn't long before things began to shift. The gang that had been threatening her seemed to disappear, at least for the time being. Rumors started to spread about their operations being disrupted, about someone stepping in and shaking things up. Evelyn had no idea who it was, but she had a feeling it had something to do with Nash. She didn't ask. She didn't need to. But then, just when she thought things might be returning to normal, another storm hit. One evening, as she was walking home from the market, she spotted a familiar face in the crowd. It was one of the gang members, the leader. His eyes locked onto hers, and in that instant, Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. She had no idea what he was doing here, but she could see the malicious gleam in his eyes. "Looks like the mouse is back," he sneered, stepping closer. Evelyn's stomach churned with anxiety. She could feel the tension building, the fear creeping back into her chest. But then, before she could react, she heard Nash's voice from behind her. "Leave her alone." Evelyn didn't have time to look back, but she could hear the unmistakable edge in Nash's voice. The gang leader froze, the sneer fatting into a scowl as he turned to face Nash. "I told you to stay out of this," the leader growled, his tone low and dangerous. "I'm not going anywhere," Nash said calmly, stepping in front of Evelyn, shielding her from the gang member's gaze. For a long moment, there was a standoff, and Evelyn could feel the tension hanging thick in the air. She wasn't sure how this was going to end, but she had a feeling Nash wasn't going to back down. He had already shown her that much. The gang member finally scowled and turned, walking away without another word. Nash didn't move, didn't take his eyes off the retreating figure until he was sure the threat had passed. Only then did he turn to Evelyn, his face softening. "You okay?" he asked quietly, his voice low, just for her. Evelyn nodded slowly, her chest tightening as she realized just how far she had come. She had allowed herself to believe in someone. She had allowed herself to trust again. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid.